Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mark Loeffler Experience. We have a great show here for you today. We got my good friend Melissa Babel from Babel Immigration Law on. We're going to be talking all immigration all day today. I know first we do economics, and then we do yurts, and now we do immigration. It's been a fun-filled week. I mean, at least smack dab in the middle, there was some meat in the bread, I guess. And because I know when I did the Are We in a Real Estate Crash, a lot of people were talking about immigration and the fact that immigration is slowing down. So that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the rental market. It's going to hurt the resale market in Canada as a whole, basically. What's going on? Because you're living this every day. You're doing it every day. And guys, if you guys do like this, you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And, thank you everyone for smashing the like button and commenting on all the videos. It's much appreciated. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's immigration's in the news all the time. I am a self-acclaimed immigration nerd. I live and breathe this stuff. And that's usually, I mean, immigration changes on a daily basis in good times. The last 6 months have been, a strain on lots of industries. And I would say it's the fastest pace of change, right? Like we literally have governments making policies on the fly, changing them, swapping them out for different policies, trying to, largely keep ahead of the pandemic, but also trying to figure out how immigration policy fits into public safety and public health and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, public health is always an issue with immigration, but like ramp it up times 100 right now. And that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, and I know, like, I hang out with the economists at CMHC sometimes, and they said, I mean, basically I said to him, I think it was 2015, when I thought Toronto was overheated then, and I said, how much higher can it go? And he said to me, basically, there's going to be 1 million to 1.5 million people move into the Greater Toronto area in the next 10 years. And to be honest, now looking back 5 years, he was probably light on that. That happened probably in the last 5 years, right? And so I guess what is COVID affected? Like, I know we have a quota, right? A quota or what
target.
A target. We can't have quotas, right? That's bad.
No.
Quotas are bad, yeah.
Target is good, quota is bad,
yeah. Yeah. So we have a target to hit for Canada as an overall. So do you have any sense, like, what's the target? 350,000 a year in this year? Or
yeah. So usually with the targets, they're like, it's set in Parliament, right? So the Minister of Immigration comes in and says, okay, Parliament, like, here's how many immigrants we need based on, 50,000 very talented and educated economists. They say the following and whatever, but it's based on estimates and economic data and all the rest of it. It's also based on like our declining population and, other economic factors.
I mean, we have a declining birth rate, right? So if we didn't bring people in, our population would be going down as our death rate is higher than our birth rate.
No doubt. You gotta have lots of kids. So I would say that the big thing to understand when you think about numbers, like when we talk about targets and how many immigrants we're going to make, that's actually like how many permanent residents are going to be created. So how many people are going to apply for permanent residence and have it be granted to them, right? And that's what we talk about when we talk about a target. We need 345, 350,000 new immigrants every year. Now, I think actually it should be 1% or even more than that every year. And I'm a big pro sort of immigration person, as long as we've got, a sensible system for how we admit people. But those numbers have to do with immigrants. And when you're talking about the housing market, you're really not just talking about immigrants. You're talking about people who live here, right? So the question is, who's living here? Who's buying houses? And with that, you have to look beyond the immigration numbers for permanent residents and look at who's moving here. And who's moving here is who has a job offer, right? So as long as there's a need, as long as the Canadian employers have a need and can't find someone in the Canadian economy, they're going to rely on foreign workers. And that is really where our immigrants come from. It's people who are already here. So I would take it with a grain of, like, there's two layers there. Take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, how many people we make immigrants? Well, those people are probably sitting in Canada in expensive houses in Toronto or waiting to buy a house, until they become a permanent resident, right? So the numbers they're not linear, right? They're not linear in terms of who's an immigrant versus who's going to buy a house.
Well, and those, obviously, when you bring a foreign worker and they need to live somewhere and they're renting, right? I mean, They don't come, most of them, I would say, probably 98% of them don't come over and buy a house in the first couple of years because they want to, number one, they want to establish themselves here. Number two, they want to, they need to prove that to their employer and to everyone that they're going to be
Sure.
useful.
Yeah.
And they're going to be kept
a lot
on,
of factors, right? And but the number one thing I would say that would prevent like a foreign worker or a foreign student from buying a house is really the 15% tax that goes on top, right? So I help people not only come into the country, but like stay and what I call transition to permanent residence. And the question's always like, okay, so when am I going to become a permanent resident so that I can organize, hire Mark Loeffler to get me a house, and then I won't have to pay the 15%, right? Because these are generally people who are well established, who've got careers, who obviously their employers have brought them here, so they're of value. And if they like it and their spouses and kids want to stay, then the next logical thing is to buy a house. But I do think that it's actually more the taxation side of things that pushes people to delay buying a house. Now, that's not to say foreign workers don't, and foreign nationals like visitors and whatever, don't buy houses in Canada. But I do think that if you're talking about someone who comes like with their employer, takes time, they settle in, you're right, like settle in, prove themselves with the employer, make sure they want to stay here. And then it's when they become a permanent resident, like, so I hand them off to you and then, they go buy a house. Like it's a good deal.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I win both ways because I'm a landlord.
Right.
So when they come over here and they can't buy a house because of the 15% tax, the unintended consequence is, well, they're over here filling a job that no Canadian was filling.
Right.
And now they need a place to live and they can't buy, or they can buy, but they don't want to pay the 15% tax, which I don't blame them. Who wants to pay tax, right? Or one that you don't need to if you're going to stay and, say 2 years, say, okay, great. And, they become my tenants.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, some people, like, if you're talking about sort of the executive crew or, sort of those who are expats, right, who've been brought here, moved around the world, a lot of times their companies pay for their housing, and it's sort of one of the perks of coming to Canada. So.
Yeah. I guess another one, I don't know if you would know this, but I mean, just in my case, like my sister just moved back from South Carolina with her husband. He got a job here. This was all pre-COVID that it was done, but they moved back in June. And, I'm hearing like from like Hong Kong and stuff like that, people are starting to, that have Canadian citizenship abroad are starting to look at it and say, maybe I don't want to be there anymore, right?
Yeah, I would say like the trend that I'm seeing and a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is people like, things got real when COVID happened, right? Like you would never think that the US and the US-Canadian border would close. I mean, even we were in the US, our family was in the US the day the announcement came where, schools are closing and all that kind of stuff. And I tell you, we hightailed it back. We were going to do an extra day at Disney and all that kind of stuff. And even as a Canadian citizen, I had this sense of like, no, I need to get home. I need to be where we're secure, where we have status. And so that's the conversation I'm having with a lot of people. Like I've had clients come out of the woodworks in the last few weeks saying, my father's Canadian. I never thought I needed the passport, but boy, oh boy, do I want it now. Or, hey, my spouse has lived in Canada, on a work permit for 4 years, 5 years. We never thought it was a big deal. What does it matter about permanent residence? We already own the house. All of a sudden, things like that, where you have families where not everyone has the same status, all of a sudden those things are, coming right to the forefront. So I would say people who maybe, or permanent residents here even, who didn't apply for citizenship because, it's not so important, it's not so urgent. All of a sudden, like COVID had the effect of just like concretizing a lot of this stuff. If you're a foreigner in a foreign country, you want to secure your status, right? That's the thing. Secure your status, know that you can stay where you want to stay, know that you can travel where you want to travel. And I mean, to find, like, you hear these couples where like one's in the US and one's in Canada, they can't be joined. And like, that's a nightmare. That's a total nightmare. So a lot of the conversations I'm having are about like secure the status, get everybody, as high up on the status level as they can, right? So if you can apply for citizenship, apply for citizenship. If you can apply for permanent residence, do that. If you can get in on a work permit, come in and stay and don't move. And you know what I mean? So like the travel restrictions, especially when it came down to like family members and things where people are used to maybe living cross border, like there's a lot of families where one person works in New York and one person works, you know what I mean? They make it work. And so it's people in that sort of circumstance where they're so used to and accustomed to freedom of travel, freedom of movement. And then boy, oh boy, have we had to reckon with some of our habits, And so that's really a lot of the conversations I'm having. Like, now's the time, we put it off, let's do it. Like, I want to get a t-shirt that says secure your status, know your rights, where you are, where you live. But yeah, it's been a challenge for anybody who has like, for tax reasons or for, all kinds of reasons why people don't want more status in a particular country. Maybe expat packages, maybe, inheritance, like all kinds of reasons why people would delay. And I just feel like there's been a lot, like the conversations I'm having are, no, now those things matter less, and our ability
Oh,
to
yeah.
matter more.
Yeah, if I have to pay a little bit extra, okay, fine. I'd
Yeah,
rather be there than here or something like that for sure.
yeah, there's a
I,
lot of that.
I mean, anecdotally, I would think obviously there's unrest in some parts of the world, plus the coronavirus and that type of thing. So that's going to lead to movement. Yet we obviously know that a lot of people still immigrate to the United States of America. Is that going to be less because of like, I'm just going to say it, it's a bit of a shit show down there. And we kind of look like the squeaky clean, Mr. Clean, like white glove service right now. Is it like, is that what our view is on the world stage or what's,
I mean, I think that's what how most Canadians feel, and the Canadians like to feel that way. I mean, so I'll answer the question in a general term, but just to give you an example, I mean, there was a lot of hubbub about foreign students in the U.S., right? So President Trump, originally in March, ICE, which is the sort of the control board for immigration in the U.S., people are afraid of them. They're like our CBSA. They said, okay, and foreign students who are in the U.S. can go to classes remotely during the pandemic. That was the word in March. And then in July, President Trump came out with a presidential proclamation saying, nope, if you're online, if your classes are not in person, you can't get a new study permit or you got to get out of the U.S. And then he was sued by Harvard and MIT. Right? Yeah, like the administration, right, was sued by Harvard. Like people were very, very upset about this. And then a week later, there's a reversal, and now there's a new requirement, and yet again, it's like a third change, right? So foreign students going into the U.S. have just been on this like roller coaster, like crazy. So that's sort of what gets in the news. But if you think about Canadian international students, it's actually really, really, really tough. Like the rules right now for Canadian international students is that if you don't already have a study permit approved, which means you've already like come to Canada, or if you don't have an approval from before March 18th, you're not getting in. So even if your visa got approved in China, you cannot get on a plane with an approved study visa to come to Canada, right? So
wow.
I think sometimes the media is part of it, or sort of like the high level 10,000 foot view of it is like US bad, Canada good. But there are some policies that go back again to public health, and there's rationale for why it's happening. But all I'm saying is it's not necessarily like an open gate into Canada. Like there definitely are restrictions, and our quarantine requirements, even that's not an immigration issue, it affects a lot of people, right? It affects everybody entering Canada, and what that does is it cools down the travel, right? So maybe people are going to wait till it's over, but it's not going to be over anytime soon.
No, I mean, like my sister came in June, they came June 4th and they quarantined for 2 weeks, right? And they got calls. So there's 4 of them in a household and they all got a call every day. I don't know if they were tracking cell phones or anything like that. I don't know how conspiracy theory you want to go yet. I mean, they got a call. Where are you? Oh, we're here.
Yeah, and right now, so if an employer, I mean, it's something it's important for any of your viewers who are bringing in foreign workers. Employers actually have an obligation to pay their workers while they're in quarantine, right? So if they're working or not working, there's an obligation on the employer. So it definitely has changed like the tenor of how things work, right? I mean, there's a real focus on public health over and above the needs of employers, over and above freedom of movement, right? Whereas normally those things are kind of equal, like yes, public health is important, but of course the economy is important. And so we've kind of seen like a shift towards the importance of public health. And I think that's very logical. Like, I think that's very, very sensible, right? We talk about Canada versus the US, that's the real big difference, right? There's the mandatory federal quarantine, which is a real big deal.
Yeah, well, I know that when we kind of spoke about this a couple of days ago about doing this, we talked about like what kind of workers be coming in, like an engineer working on Bruce Power. We just don't have them here, and so they're quarantined, but they're getting paid while they're in quarantine, or it might be like somewhere in software, whatever, right? Like it's somebody who does. They can't find somebody in Canada to fill the position, so they bring in somebody, and typically that's pretty high skilled labor. And on the other side of it, it's a lot of trades, right? Like we bring in probably a lot of trades because I mean, Canadian kids just aren't going and getting and learning trades, right? Like we're talking to my buddy who's a welder and he's up in Kincardine right now because that reason, right? He's working at the Bruce. He's a welder, and I mean he makes great money. And I said, That's a different issue, but I mean, those are the people that we're bringing in, right? These are the people that now are, so do we know the numbers? Is that, obviously that's probably down. Is it down a lot? Is it down?
So, I mean, I think numbers is something that we'll probably hear when like usually the immigration levels plan is tabled in November. So that's usually there's a retrospective, like in terms of how many people have entered. There's no target or cap for foreign workers. Then it's all about employer need. So you think about the U.S. They throw out numbers like 65,000 H-1Bs, or 100,000 of this, or we don't have that kind of numerical limitation on foreign workers. If the employer needs somebody, then as long as you can make the argument and fit it to a category, then generally they can come. Yeah, and so I would say, I mean, a lot of what happens in Canadian immigration policy is that where there's one group that needs something, it very often bleeds over into another. So I mean, the example was in 2015. With people working in the food industry, hospitality industry, there was a lot of concern about worker abuse and all the rest, and that gave birth to our employer compliance regime, which applies for everybody from everybody from your housekeeper or nanny up to the CEO of a major corporation. It's one rule for everybody, and so I think that's kind of what's happening now. Like, I mean, you think about the agricultural workers in Windsor, Essex. I mean, the principal reason why that region, or that healthcare region, has stayed or been slower to transition into different stages is because of the agricultural workers. And so, we think about protecting, like, yeah, most foreign workers are coming and they don't need protection, and they're coming in, they're negotiating for themselves, they're probably getting, great pay and all the rest of it. But there's always a group there that, that needs some protection and that needs to have a little bit more infrastructure. And so what happens is that usually, from a policy perspective, the policy is created to protect the most vulnerable, but then it does bleed over, right? I mean, does your CEO sitting in the hotel quarantining, is he or she really at risk? Probably not. They're probably enjoying the 2 weeks in the hotel. But the agricultural workers down on the farms, who are growing our organic lettuce and all these expensive things that we buy, I mean, they do need the protection, right? So it's a tough policy balance, right? Because the government's trying to get it right for everybody, but thinking of all the sort of the ranges, right? Like everyone from a skilled worker to an unskilled worker to someone who's coming in and working for very, very low wages often.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it back, and I know we talked a bit about CMHC and Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and they predicted that real estate was going to basically fall off a cliff of 20%. And one of the main reasons they cited was that immigration which is a main driver of, or is a driver of real estate, is going to basically stop.
So I would disagree, respectfully.
By the way, I'm on record of disagreeing with CMHC too.
Okay.
So yeah.
I mean, so our current Minister of Immigration, there's no message from him that's anything but steady as she goes. There are definitely impediments, right? Like just like the logistics, right? So I want to apply for permanent residence. I'm a welder. I've worked at Bruce Power. I got a great job, and whatever. My English is great, et cetera, right? I want to apply for immigration. But from March until about July, I actually couldn't go get a photograph ticket, or I couldn't do a language test, or I couldn't get my fingerprints done because I had to go in person, right? So there's some like logistical, like physical things that couldn't be done. But what I would say is all that's doing is creating pent-up demand, right? Yeah. There's still a need. The employers need their foreign workers. I mean, if you bring someone in, and you invest, you're an employer, you invest 3 years in them. I mean, the last thing you want to do is see that person go, right? You want them to stay, you're part of your company, part of the fabric, right? So I think it's just a pent up demand thing. I think it's a delay. And also Parliament, like there's a commitment to Parliament to make so many immigrants per year. Now, are the numbers going to like dry up if they're not done in 1 year, or are they going to bleed over? I would strongly suspect that there's a demand and they'll just bleed over into the next year, right? Because we have a 3-year level plan. So worst case scenario, it's going into the next year. But I mean, the immigration offices have been working, like there's some reduction in staff, and like visa offices overseas are definitely running like skeleton crews. So I would say there's a pent up demand, there's a delay, but I'd be shocked if our immigration numbers go down. I mean, Canada needs it. Like there's no question, like our economy needs it, our high tech sector needs it, our trades are necessary. We need someone to pick the lettuce. These are like our whole economy requires global mobility and trade, and I cannot see that changing because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I mean, Melissa, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge. I mean, yeah, it's good to hear it from an expert. I was going to say an expert. And yeah, so if you guys have any immigration questions or you want to reach out to Melissa, I will link her website down below, and you can get her through there. Any final words before we jump off?
You know, we're a country of immigrants. Like nothing is going to change that, and it's good for. I think it's good for the soul. It's good for the country. I love what I do, and I love working with people to help them try to come here and reach their goals. So yeah, I think it's part of what we are, as part of who we are as a people. And you know, yeah, some things put us behind, but I don't think it's going to change who we are at the core.
That's right. Good. Great stuff. Great way to end it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Melissa.